Someone bottled it on Monday. I think Starmer could have been ousted then, but right now it doesn't seem like anyone has a clear route through.
Let's start with some politics. The Prime Minister comes into this week of recess badly wounded. He's just experienced what might be the worst 2 weeks of his premiership, and his number 10 operation has been gutted by senior departures, but he's still there. And he now apparently has a plan to fight on to surer footing in the lead up to the Gorton and Denton by-election later this month. Patrick, look, the fact that he's still there is to some people a surprise. How damaged is he? How bad is it right now?
Well, they blinked, the people who wanted to get rid of him. A week ago, we thought he wasn't going to last the week. And in fact, when Anas Sarwar resigned mid-afternoon last Monday, I was rung up by a paper wanting me to do a political obituary by 5 o'clock.
Oh, wow, really?
So can you, yeah. So I did, and then that wasn't used, and then I polished it, and it probably now won't get used until May, or maybe not even after that. I think the moment came and went when no one followed Anas Sarwar. They then had the staged address to the PLP, the Labour Parliamentary Party, where he had his standing ovations, as was always going to happen once he got to that point. And really, unless something suddenly emerges, and these days anything could, another Mandelson revelation or something, he's got to Gorton and Denton. He's probably got until May.
Yeah.
And then we'll see whether the results... I mean, as ever, MPs being scared about losing their seats is what tends to be the prime motivator to be rebellious.
The fact that he seems to be, though, relatively comfortable for now, right now, I sort of see as being, it's basically like a sort of Three Stooges situation with his competitors, as in the old Three Stooges sketch where the three of them try and get through the door at the same time, and they all get stuck on each other's shoulders and can't move. And that's more or less what's going on with Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, and whoever the other one is, Andy Burnham, probably. Cindy, what do you think? I mean, what do you think of the idea that it's basically infighting over a successor that is helping him survive, because no one can decide where to go next?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if you look at the two frontrunners, it's Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting, and Angela Rayner still hasn't got her tax affairs in order. HMRC's that's not being resolved. And then Wes Streeting has been quite implicated in the Peter Mandelson saga, a state of affairs that he tried to rectify by unilaterally releasing his own WhatsApp messages, which got him into more trouble in number 10. But I think he, if he had taken that step last Monday to go behind Anas Sarwar, some reports are saying that actually that was why Anas Sarwar came out to do that, having had reassurances from Wes Streeting, then maybe that would have snowballed into a leadership context. But I think, if the Conservative Party, with its many data points of regicide, tells us something, is that it's often not the person who wields the sword, who wields the knife, who then becomes the leader afterwards. So nobody wants to quite make that first step, and maybe that's what Wes Streeting was thinking about as well. Either way, as Patrick says, someone bottled it on Monday. I think Starmer could have been ousted then, but right now it doesn't seem like anyone has a clear route through.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, Patrick, of the idea of a unity candidate, sort of John Healey, Yvette Cooper? Unity candidate generally means boring candidate, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, Starmer was the boring candidate.
Right.
I mean,
and he was the unity candidate. When you look at the idea of what they need now is a grey, slightly dull, efficient man who's going to get them through. It's like, that's what you did last time.
I mean, I have wondered whether Starmer was the male candidate last time. He was up against 4 women, and Labour, for whatever reason I don't quite understand, don't like to elect women as leaders, and that may have counted in his favour. But he was following Boris Johnson and Liz Truss on one side and Jeremy Corbyn on the other. I mean, you'd be hard not to look boring and stale. I've always wondered why Hilary Benn is never named in these things. He's competent, he's a good statesman, a good speaker.
Girl's name.
Hillary, well, perhaps that's it. I don't know, except you doubtless saw the big Tim Shipman piece.
Yeah, of course, in the Spectator, yeah.
And it talks about Starmer being disengaged, not really never coming back from a weekend with any ideas.
Yeah.
And wondering what he's in it for. But, he is in it, he is there.
Yep,
and he lingers.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this, just on and on and on forever. But right now, let's talk about social media, whether the government is heading towards a ban on it for under 16s. They say they want new powers to force social media companies to protect children's well-being online. They want to crack down on what they call the vile, illegal content created by AI. And they say their new powers will mean we can act very fast every time technology evolves. Keir Starmer's been talking about this morning.
The status quo is not good enough. The Online Safety Act, yes, a good piece of legislation, but it took 8 years. I'm not prepared to let this take 8 years, which is why we're taking the powers now. We'll have the consultation, and then when we've got the outcome, we can implement it very, very quickly.
Cindy, I think this is going to happen. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen too, which raises the question of why doesn't he just do it now? the Conservative Party first brought it to the kind of British political conversation following the Australians having the ban. Starmer's position has been, we're going to do a consultation about it, but actually poll after poll shows that actually a majority of people think that this is a good idea. So it's just one of those things, linking to our previous conversation about how much longer does Starmer have. Arguably he's got until the May election to turn things around a bit. It feels like the kind of policy he doesn't need to consult on and just do, actually, because it will be popular and it will be good for society to have under 16s off of social media. I have slight gripes about the other thing that he mentioned today, which was the VPN banning, and happy to talk about that a bit more. But I think that goes into more civil liberties concerns, because the idea of having an ID registration for VPN defeats the entire point of it. But I think for the social media ban, it's unclear to me why politically he wouldn't just do it now.
Tell me about the VPN thing then. I mean, because I understand what you mean. Because basically, for people who don't know, a VPN is a service that basically shields who you are from even your own internet provider, which allows for anonymity online. So, what are your issues there, Cindy?
Yeah, exactly. What a VPN does is basically it gives you a different address to go onto the internet with. So you can go from, for example, if I use my VPN now, I can say that I'm in America or in Taiwan or in Japan or wherever you want to. And that kind of circumvents the national restrictions on the internet. The reason that I use it is because when I go to China, I have to use a VPN. I have to use a VPN to access the internet outside the Great Firewall. And the whole idea of VPNs is to keep your privacy. So if you had to register with your real ID for VPN, because that's the only way they can verify the age, it totally defeats the civil liberties point of having these kinds of tools, which are useful in many, many ways other than under 16s watching porn.
Patrick, look, what I mean, is there a civil liberties issue that Keir Starmer is overlooking here? Because look, you look at the basics of this situation. It is a possible imminent thing on which lots of research has been done. It is pretty popular with the public, and while expert opinion is divided, it probably leans to his side. And you think this seems like an open goal, and then you think ID cards. Was there ever a man so capable of taking a popular, workable policy and rendering it toxic within days?
Yes, was that U-turn number 11 or 12?
Who knows?
Yeah. Look, as the father of a teenager who spends far too much of her time on the phone, I think I support this policy, except that she'll turn 16 just around the time it gets enacted, so it's a bit pointless. But I do see the toxic effect that it has on mental health, down to the fact that she dropped her mobile phone on Christmas morning and didn't have it for a few days, and her mood just suddenly improved. I was worried she'd go traumatic about it, but actually she was very pragmatic and having a reason not to be in touch with people the whole time, and therefore not to get worried about why hasn't so-and-so replied to me, or why have someone said something in a... that was gone, and that was a sudden sign that actually phones really aren't doing good things. I'd like them to ban social media for over 16s too. I think just unplug the internet. We'll all be much happier.
I mean, obviously, you will still want to use the Times Radio app or your smart speaker
wireless
in order to listen to us if you do not have a DAB radio available to you. Let's talk about a big story that was unravelling over the weekend. The campaign group Labour Together, which of course helped Sir Keir Starmer get elected, was run by Morgan McSweeney. Apparently it hired lobbyists to effectively smear Sunday Times journalists who were investigating donations to the group. The editor of the Sunday Times, Ben Taylor, told Times Radio that he's not had an apology or an explanation.
I think the real people who haven't spoken here are members of the cabinet and Morgan McSweeney, who were fully aware of this and were quite happy to talk about it around Westminster, and even tried to get the story going in another paper to suggest that the Sunday Times was being used by the Russian state. Now, they are the people that I would really like to hear from, but I'm not holding my breath.
Well, the Prime Minister himself was asked about this morning.
There will be a Cabinet Office investigation into the allegations, and quite right to. And so that is already in place. I didn't know anything about this investigation, and it absolutely needs to be looked into. So the Cabinet Office will be establishing the facts.
Cindy, look, just first up, this story is weird, don't you think? It's just weird. It's a weird thing to want to do. It's a weird thing to respond in this kind of way when all they're doing is looking into donations, particularly when the original story about donations Labour Together was true and correct anyway.
Yeah, they were banged to rights because the Electoral Commission fined Labour Together for infringing electoral donation rules. So the story was true. The Labour Together was fined. Then they commissioned this this PR company to look into the journalists who did the story to see if they have any untoward motives, paying tens of thousands of pounds for this contract. And then the company comes back and says that actually they're linked to Russia without providing any evidence. And then those reports are then reported to GCHQ and circulated around the Labour Party and with friendly media. It's all really concerning that this is the reaction of an organisation that's close to government to being investigated for a story that is banged to rights. I'm laughing, but it's really not funny at all. I mean, it's really terrifying, actually. I mean, the investigation of the journalists themselves, I think, is already quite bizarre when the story itself was not malicious in a way. But the idea of smearing them as well with baseless accusations, instead of putting it to them, it's actually quite dystopian.
Well, I mean, so I sort of think, Patrick, this is one of these stories that it's important to get out of the initial mindset you'll be in about it. And I'm sure a lot of people would listen to this and be like, well, look, journalists were investigating people. What's wrong with them with somebody else investigating them back? But that's not how it works, right?
No, I also don't see what's wrong with the sort of smearing journalists, to be honest.
So speaks the diarist of long standing.
Well,
yeah.
in the old-fashioned way of just gossiping about them in the Westminster bars.
Right.
The thing I don't understand is what they were hoping to get out of this. Were they really expecting anyone would write a story about these journalists based on no evidence on serious? So
I know it looks like that's what we do, but it isn't really.
No,
yeah.
no, well, indeed.
Yeah.
So even the most anti-Times newspapers wouldn't run something without any evidence. So it strikes me as a massive waste of money just to incite a bit of gossip around Westminster bars they could have got for free.
What the investigating journalists back thing, though? I mean, we're having some text messages about this, even as we talk. I'm just sort of very. I sort of think this might sound sort of hypocritical, but I think there is a way that media is meant to behave and there is a way that politics is meant to behave, and they shouldn't behave in the opposite kind of ways. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I suppose so, but those who give it have to take it. I don't know. I'm not outraged by it, except that it just seems completely wrong and false that what they were coming up with.
Cindy, join me in my outrage.
Well, I'm not. I think journalists can be investigated. I don't think we're beyond investigation, and we have seen in the past crook journalists and real spies have used journalism as a cover, as in the case of Kim Philby, for example. But I think so. I don't think journalists are beyond investigation, but I think the idea of smearing them, of working for a foreign state without any accusation, I think that, Patrick, is what concerns me the most about this. And I am probably a bit biased here because I'm often accused of being a Chinese spy. Now, I think when it comes to this kind of treasonous accusation, the burden of proof lies on the accuser to prove that. You can't just go around saying, oh, they're blah, blah, blah spy, or they're working for whatever state, without any repercussions. And for the fact that this is such an organisation so close to the government, I think it's just beneath them. I mean, the real story here is maybe how much this PR company has really got them around their little finger and got this great contract from basically doing a dossier about nothing.
That's exactly my point, that I didn't really understand why they commissioned this PR company to do it when, if they want to have a bit of a whinge about journalists, they could. Yeah. Clearly, what they are alleging is outrageous. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite right. Cindy, do you think is this going to sort of keep going into Downing Street? The idea that now, it was a minister in the Cabinet Office, who was behind this. He's now in the Cabinet Office. It's going to be investigated by the Cabinet Office. That sounds a bit iffy. It all looks sort of dirty in a way that's going to sort of stretch into the current Labour government. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think this one, as we say in the industry, has got legs because the story only came out yesterday, and already Downing Street has had to comment on it. As you say, one of the person in charge of the organisation at the time is now a minister. So I think, and also cynically, given that it is about journalists, there is obviously, journalists are talking about it, right? I mean, journalists are outraged and also, worried that they might be the target of this kind of stuff themselves. So I think it will run for a few more days at least.
Yeah, no, I would have thought so. I mean, something that I sort of really stood out to me in the reporting. I was discussing this a little bit earlier, But a bit of it that was about Gabriel Pogrund, and about the report suggested that there was a mismatch between his faith and his politics, which I found quite offensive on a bunch of levels.
Yes, absolutely.
Firstly, the suggestion that as a Jewish reporter, Gabriel should even have particular politics in the first place. But secondly, the suggestion that his reporting should be motivated by his politics.
Yeah, that was extraordinary.
Yeah, I thought both bits of that were just grim. Let's move on. Another piece in the Times today. There's a piece about white collar workers who are leaving their jobs for the trades. Education providers particularly are seeing a shift towards apprenticeships and hands-on work as AI becomes increasingly able to manage office tasks. Patrick, do you ever think of packing it all in, becoming a plumber?
Well, I realise how incompetent I am at so many basic tasks whenever I have to get someone in. We had to get a plumber to just recharge our boiler with water, and I thought, oh gosh, I could have saved myself some money there if I had any ability. I leave all these things to my wife. She's the DIY expert. I think it's really important. People can make lots of money from this, and actually perhaps rather than wasting your money going to university to then just go into a job with lots of, or not go into a job and have lots of debt, makes sense to go and make some money.
I do rudimentary plumbing around the house. I remember the first time I remember doing it, I replaced a pipe that was running up the outside of the house that was leaking, and it was a big project for a weekend, and I sort of heaved off the old one, bought a new pipe, stuck it on, all that kind of stuff. An episode which my kids to this day refer to as the time Daddy broke the house, which is just deeply, deeply, deeply unfair. Cindy, what do you think about this? How about electrician? Maybe I don't know, some kind of manual trade. Is that going to work for you?
Yeah. If the Times doesn't work out, for sure. I mean, I've been doing some work on my house recently, and the builder makes a lot of money actually, and he's very reasonably priced. But I'm thinking, God, for a couple of weeks of work, you're getting quite a lot of money, much more than journalism pays at a certain level. And as the article points out, it's a bit more AI proof. I don't know if it's totally AI proof, because actually I do get ChatGPT to tell me about how to do basic DIY around the house as well, but it is certainly more AI proof right now than, let's say, a paralegal or an accountant or one of those kind of basic office jobs.
There's also not technical skills. One of the case studies here is a chap who abandoned his 3-decade career in IT to become a postman, and that actually sounds rather appealing.
Well, the real story here, it's not like a funny one about, how good we'd all be at bricklaying. It is about the imminent plunging decline of white collar work, isn't it, Patrick?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and people are feeling the pressure, particularly at a certain age, perhaps, and thinking that once they're out of work, they'll never get work again. So it's midlife workers as well as those coming into the jobs market, who are worried about what is going to be there for them.
Do you think we're ready for this, Cindy? I don't mean us personally, because of course our plumbing skills would all be excellent. I mean, just as a society, the sort of the bedrock of the professional middle classes, perhaps no longer, they're no longer being as much work for accountants, for lawyers, for any kind of managerial post, for any kind of analyst, for any kind of book learning job, basically.
I don't think we're ready for this at all. And if you look at how fast AI is advancing in the last few years, just think it's 2022 when ChatGPT first came out. That's less than 4 years ago, and how much it's changed people's lives. I mean, of course, many listeners might not be using it, but those who use it know how capable it is of changing your lives. And we haven't actually gone full adoption just yet. But when we do, because it's getting so much better so quickly, it will change society. And I think anyone who's not alive to that right now, who doesn't understand what AI does, is going to find themselves really caught out very quickly. And then on a society level, we're already seeing signs like graduate jobs kind of shrinking. This week, because it's Chinese New Year, all these Chinese AI companies have been releasing their latest models as a bit of a holiday boon. And the stuff that's coming out of there is just incredible. It's just, we are, centuries away from the progress that we were making 4 years ago. It is just going to be so incredible. And I don't think people are really fully cognizant of that. AI is not a real top political priority for politicians or for voters, but it's going to have to be very, very quickly, because the tech is changing regardless of whether or not you like it. All these AI geniuses are doing all that stuff very, very quickly, and I think ordinary people risk being left behind.
Yeah, and I think we'll notice it most of all when it begins to impact the regulated professions, because I mentioned things like accountancy and law, and I guess medicine is another one. At the moment, you can't just really rely on AI for that, because there are laws and rules about the people who are allowed to give you various kinds of advice. Once that begins to change, I think that a real sort of going to be a real sense of a sort of a, I don't know, like a sort of a white collar professional house of cards coming tumbling down.
We'll also notice it when AI makes bad mistakes and people trust it. I mean, at the moment, I get immensely irritated now that whenever I Google search something, the AI option comes up first, and it's normally quite wrong.
It's normally wrong. Yeah.
Now that doesn't really matter because I've got enough sense that I can go and do further research. But actually, if you're relying on accountancy or something like that, and AI goes and puts a decimal point in the wrong place, or you're relying on medical judgments from a computer, that's perhaps the next big scandal that will be coming out, is that people trusting AI and AI not being right.
Somebody sent me something.
Unplug the internet.
Somebody sent me something a couple of weeks ago in which they'd done, I can't remember what it was, some AI search that told them loads of information about my first wife, which was a great shock to my current wife, who was under the impression that she has been my only wife.
Was this Labour together?
My impression as well.
Was Labour together putting a dossier about you?
Perhaps it was. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Cindy, I want you to explain to me now a trend called China maxing has taken off in the West, apparently, from Chinese wellness practices, including warm apple-boiled water, indoor slippers, longevity exercises. People are sharing videos of themselves online, learning to be Chinese. Cindy, first and vital question, what do I do with the apple-boiled water?
This was new to me, so it must be from a different region of China than I'm not the one I'm coming from. I saw this first of all on TikTok where it was news to me, but I think it's to make some kind of fruit tea. It sounds kind of horrible.
I thought you might be bathing in it, or the fact that people are merely drinking it is a little bit disappointing.
Sorry to say.
China maxing. What should I think about this? Is this weird, or is this just sort of wonderful?
Look, it's kind of fun, and it's wonderful for someone like me where my Chineseness has sort of, growing up in the UK has been a source of embarrassment sometimes, the way that my mum would literally force my friends to take off their outside shoes and make them wear our slippers as they come into our house, almost militaristically, has been embarrassing. But now apparently it's cool. So that's great. That's nice. and I actually wrote about this for TT a few weeks ago, and it's long overdue because Japan and then South Korea were the cool Asian countries. I think it's about time that China becomes cool, but at the same time, of course, it can just whitewash a whole load of things. If your adoration and for the culture means that you kind of whitewash some of the other parts that's not good about the country at the moment, or if you only see what tourists see, then that of course has more insidious side. So I think good, in terms of it being a TikTok trend, bad if you're then going to make political judgments on the country as some Gen Z influencers have done.
But when it extends to, I don't know, people doing their makeup Chinese style, sort of, Chinese clothing and so on, I sort of think, I mean, if I was to decide that I was going to style myself in as Jamaican a way possible, I'd be something of a laughing stock. Why is this different?
Well, I think this is a generational thing, because I think it's mainly Gen Z doing this, and they are actually very anti-woke. They're actually quite against it. And then this whole idea of becoming Chinese, which is one of the lines, one of the memes, says, well, I'm so Chinese now, I don't call it Chinatown, I just call it town. All of this stuff is very anti-woke, of the sort that the millennials before them were very, very proper and prim about cultural appropriation, all that sort of stuff. I think it's a reaction to that. People are saying, no, we're just going to kind of do stupid stuff. It's just funny because it is stupid. And because obviously it's impossible, but we're going to do it anyway because it's funny.
Patrick, will you be China maxing?
I think it is very refreshing, as Cindy says, that after all the cultural appropriation years and that you couldn't take an interest in another country's cuisine. Do you remember Gordon Ramsay did, I can't remember which Korean food, and they said this was cultural appropriation. I think it's great to show interest in the quirks that make us all special. And if you want to try Chinese food or wear Chinese outfits, great. But I'm just thinking back to Sean Connery in You Only Live Twice, when he becomes the world's least convincing Japanese person.
Yes.
By largely just sort of shaving his eyebrows a bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that was quite maxing. That was I think there was a haircut involved as well.
Yes.
It was
and put on a kimono.
I'm trying to think which country I can see you maxing. Yeah, I mean, could we both try New Zealand maxing?
Yeah,
that might work.
That involves eating lots of lamb, doesn't it?
Yeah,
being good at rugby.
Uzbekistan maxing? I'm not sure.
I think taking an interest in other nationalities and what makes them tick and their foods and their culture is wonderful, and we shouldn't be sneered at, which is what it felt like before if you did take an interest.
Yeah, fair enough, up to and including the makeup. Patrick, you recently took your 8-year-old son wine tasting. Explain yourself.
Well, this was for a piece...
French maxing, I suppose.
Very much French maxing, indeed. This was for a piece for The Spectator based on the fact that the junior health minister has said that people shouldn't, or under 18 shouldn't be allowed to have non-alcoholic versions of booze in case it becomes a gateway drug, and it normalises drink. So things like 0% lager or something like that, ban it all. And this is so typical of this prudish government. And so I wrote a piece saying that actually children should not necessarily be hitting the booze, but they should be be aware of it. They should have it around it. And I took my son wine tasting in France. We had 21 different wines. He, of course, didn't touch a drop through his lips, but he smelt them when we talked about what it smelt of and what the colour was. And that was normalising. I wanted him to understand that wine is something you appreciate and you can discuss and sip rather than glug.
Well, this might be a mad thing to say, but I've always thought the link between the link between alcohol and drunkenness is not as inevitable as people seem to think it is. Plenty of people can enjoy alcohol just fine without getting drunk. Plenty of people can grow up around alcohol, but actually when they start getting drunk, it's a very different sort of thing to the thing they grew up around. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
You know, I mean, like, I think like my parents often drank wine at home. I don't think I ever saw either of them drunk. And when I started drinking as a teenager, I wouldn't say there was any connection between that and seeing a bottle of wine open on a Sunday lunchtime. Do you know what I mean?
No, but banning you from having an alco pop or something in case you suddenly started hitting the real stuff.
I mean, I guess if I've been drinking
shandy.
I guess if I've been drinking an alcohol pop at Sunday lunch, then questions should indeed have been asked. But Cindy, what do you think about this? How quickly should kids start drinking?
No, I agree with Patrick. I think if you normalise alcohol around kids, then they feel like it's less taboo. And if anything, if you feel like it's taboo, when you're off drinking age or we can get your hands on some alcohol, you're probably going to go overcompensate, go a bit too far because it's so, fun and exciting because you've never seen it before. So I think actually normalising it is actually the way to go, actually. So well done, Patrick. I mean, just to make it background, isn't it? To say that normal adults have a little bit of this. It doesn't have to be, in a dangerous or harmful way. And just bear in mind how much you're having. And I'm sure Patrick's kid's going to grow up having that really healthy relationship with alcohol. Drugs, interestingly, I wonder if the logic, if your logic would sustain to drugs as well.
Well, I mean, or just, tobacco. When are you going to give him a cigar? Because it's best to be familiar around these things early, as Cindy says, so you don't get carried away when you're older.
Yeah, well,
eight seems a fine age.
Do you know the French used to allow alcohol in school lunches until 1981, as recently as that. You could have wine with your school lunch.
That's astonishing.
They also marvellously, the French have 4-course school lunches, a cheese-board course.
That's absolutely magnificent.
I think that is it. I am definitely French maxing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've said this before, I'm sure, on the show, but the thing I admire most about the French is their motorway service stations, where you're driving long distance, but you can still stop for a beer and a flick knife and some dynamite.
Yes,
why not? Magnificent. Speaking similarly of French things, perhaps the Times has a piece today on how prawn toast has been reinvented for fine dining, which got us thinking, what would you reinvent for fine dining? For example, our producer Tom has reinvented baked beans. He adds chorizo and says they are now fine food. I suppose in my house we've sort of reinvented the pea, in that we sort of chop it up and do things with it and put it on a sort of eggs, a pea-based eggs Benedict, which is quite nice. Cindy, what traditional old rubbish food would you invent as glam and fine? Cindy.
Well, I think I was thinking cheese toasty, actually, but then I was thinking maybe the pleasure of a cheese toasty is that it's not glam. So to answer your question, Hugo, I think I would like fine dining versions of most things, but I would also want to make sure that the original version is still around to have that joy of not fine dining. You can't just live off a fine diner. You can't sustain someone like that.
Yeah, I think that's actually absolutely the right way around. Let's make fine food less fine. Patrick?
I completely agree. Look, beans on toast with cheese is, for me, the gourmet meal, but you can put some pickled onions in it, or you can put some Worcestershire sauce or something like that, just to spice it up a bit.
Something a friend of mine suggested recently that changed my life, right? Baked potato with cheese, right? I know this isn't new, and Marmite.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I wouldn't be wanting to pay 50 quid for it.
No, that's true. I wouldn't want to consider it fine dining. It's true. If I turned up at a sort of swanky restaurant, then when I got you a baked potato with cheese and Marmite, you'd be like, could have done that at home. Look, let's talk about one more. Generation Z have fallen for old cars, or as the Sunday Times put it, old bangers. Jack Burke writes in the paper that there's a growing subculture of people of his generation, of similar backgrounds, city kids from more or less middle-class backgrounds, rediscovering and falling in love with the cars of the 90s and noughties. Cindy, you're of the sort of age where I have to ask, are you familiar with the concept of a car?
Only if it's driverless.
Right. Do you drive?
I do drive, but I don't have a car at the moment.
If you did, would it be a horrendous old sort of Rover with like leather seats or something, or would you like?
No,
I'm
shamefully a part of the EV club, fan club. I think my next car would definitely be an EV.
Right. Okay, Patrick.
Well, as you would expect, I'm very old-fashioned on this. As well as getting my son into drinking, I was explaining to him how gear shifts used to work, how manual, because I have an automatic, like probably everyone does now. And I was telling him I missed sort of listening for the change in tone of the engine as you try and shift the gears. And perhaps I'd love to go back to a car I have to drive a bit more.
One of my kids is about to start learning to drive, and actually it's a real thing because we have an automatic. You can't have a learning to drive in an automatic.
No.
You've got to learn to be able to change gear.
And I learned on a really old car, so this would have been in the mid-90s. And, using the clutch. Does anyone have a clutch these days? Stalling on a cold day and things like that.
When I hire a car, there's always a clutch. Cindy, can you work a clutch?
No, I actually learned on an automatic.
Oh, really?
Very bad advice from my mum, yeah. So I can only drive an automatic. And that's the reason I don't have a car, is because my fiancé has a car, but it's a manual because he's a petrol head, so he insists on a manual, which means I'm incapable of driving his car. So I always have to be sitting in the passenger seat in charge of the music, which isn't so bad, I guess.
Patrick, first car?
The one I drive, oh gosh, what was it? A Seat or something. It was very unglamorous, but it was, my mother's car. I drove a bit. But yes, a choke. We need chokes.
Yeah, my first car was a classic Mini Mayfair.
Yeah.
Cost me £625. Bought it in Edinburgh, saw a sign in the window. Didn't last very long, but it had a choke and a clutch.
Yeah, first one I owned was a Ford Ka.
Yeah.
And a little dainty little thing. I quite loved that. But also we would need cars that can only get long wave.
Yes, indeed. Long wave cars with chokes and clutches. Marvellous.
And no seatbelts.
Cindy, Patrick Kidd, thanks very much indeed for being with me. This is Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio.